Hi folks, today I'm going to do a tutorial video on how to fix the paint chips on the moldings of, well, any car, but this just happens to be a Porsche 928. Now as you can see, I've covered up the black underneath the chips with just some touch-up paint to kind of hide the black just a little bit. But today I'm going to do it properly and show you how. Now the first thing you're going to have to do is get the molding off. Now what you can do is get a blade or a knife and slip it underneath, and you'll find a plug in there. It's really hard to get the camera in to have a look at this at this point, but you just slip it in there and just kind of twist the blade to pry it off. Once you got it off like that, here I'll show you now underneath with the camera, that little plug is the one that fits in the hole there and holds it in place. So you go along and just carefully pull it off and get the rubber double-sided tape or whatever that is off and get it out of the way. And then pull it all off. And there you go. Now it's off. And underneath it's kind of ugly and dirty, but that's okay. We'll be hiding that by putting it back on later. Now the next thing you want to do is just pick the loose paint off where it's chipped and loose. Just keep going along like that, pulling off all the loose paint until you get back to the point where the paint is still stuck tight and solid onto the trim. Just get rid of that, and then you're ready for the next step. Once you've got all the loose and chipping paint off, then just get yourself a bit of 80 grit sandpaper and start sanding along the edges, smoothing it out so that there's a gradual transition between paint and non-paint so that you don't get any lines once you paint it over afterwards. Do it with 80 grit at first to get rid of the bulk of it, and then just change to a 600 grit later on, and you just use your thumb. It seems to be effective enough for me anyway, and then just fine sand it until you get a nice gradual transition from paint to non-paint. That's the best way to get a nice clean finish at the end. So see, I'm finishing up a little bit here with fine grit, trying to get a nice smooth transition. And you know what? It's better to actually put it against a hard surface or a table to do this. I'm doing that actually off camera later, but so once you got it feathered out good, it should look something like this. Now you can see that this has actually been done before, because you can see a layer of paint, a layer of primer, then another layer of paint and another primer underneath it. So this has obviously been done before, but it is a 31-year-old car, so that's to be expected. So anyway, once you've got that done, you want to put some texture on the non-painted part, and you also want to go along the entire thing with some fine grit, that's 600 grit paper, and make sure that the entire thing is textured, including the old paint that is still in good condition, because then it gives something, it gives a texture for the new paint and primer to adhere to properly, so it won't chip and peel very quickly in the future. So once you've got a fine texture all over the entire piece, and you've sanded it down with fine grit paper, just give it a wipe with a clean dry rag to get the powder and dust off of the trim that you've created by sanding it, because obviously that's not a good thing to have stuck under your paint. Now the next step, you want to take a high build, high filler primer. You can get it at your local auto store to do the next step. Now what you want to do is prime the entire thing. I was actually just going to do the one spot where I took the paint off, but it actually is a good idea to just go ahead and prime the whole thing. For one thing, it helps make all the flaws a little bit more visible when you're sanding. So put a few coats on, make sure it's thick enough to fill in the cracks, but don't do it in too much of a thick coat at once, otherwise it will run, and you don't want runs. It's just more to have to sand out later. So finish that up with the primer, and then we'll go towards the next step. Okay, now as I expected, I don't know if the camera can pick up that properly, but there is still some lines in it, but that's okay. That's why we use a high filler, high builder primer. Now what you want to do is just take the coarse grit, go over it quickly at first to get rid of the bulk of those lines, and once you've done that with the coarse grit, then you just take some fine grit and just carefully smooth it out. Now if you're not that fussy, you don't have to perfect this, because it'll only leave a fine line that only a trained eye will see. But I'm a little bit fussy, so I'm going to do it right. So obviously once you've got this really fine down again, you've sanded it again, you go over and prime it again. And if you have to do this step a couple of times, then do it until you get it right. Now while you're waiting for everything to dry, you might as well come back to the car. As you can see, I took the other part of the trim off too, preparing to get ready to do that later. And just clean up all the gunk that's underneath it. I'm just using some ordinary Windex, giving it a wipe, cleaning it up so that there's not a mess under there when you stick it back on the car. Now once you've done this, you've wiped it off good and clean, you want to make sure that there's no soap on it. So what you do afterwards is just hose it off, get the soapy residue off, because you want it to adhere properly just to the bare paint. I'm going to show you how to do that later on. So just get rid of the soapy residue, and then it's ready to be stuck back on. So what I want to point out to you guys also is whenever you're using these cans, give them a really good shake like this for about 2 or 3 minutes to make sure everything's mixed up properly and the paint works well. If you don't do that, then it might be gobby, or just the color might not mix properly. So what I did is I got this paint from my local auto store, and I got it quite a while ago, but now I'm ready to use it. What I did is I actually just took off the gas cap cover here, took it into the store, they scanned it, put it on their computer, and they made up a formula to match it. And it turned out to be a really good match. It's good paint, and you can't see any color difference at all. Now, when you're about to do the painting, you want to spray a little bit just on a random surface here to make sure that it's spitting out properly. And then when you're ready, just go ahead and paint the trim. You might want to do a couple of coats. Don't do it too thick or it'll run, and that's not a good thing. So come back, do 2 or 3 coats, and make sure it's all covered in nice smooth strokes, and you'll get a good texture. Now once you're done this, you will need a clear coat on top of it. I'll get to that in a second. Just want to throw this little bit of video in here. I had to do this little spot here, redo it again. When you want to get a really good fine feathering, a nice line-free finish, then just take a piece of 600 grit paper and do it in little round swirls very carefully, just with your thumb, and then you'll get a nice smooth finish, and hopefully nothing will show through it all, and you'll end up with a perfect glaze once it's done. The next step is clear coat. Now, I'm probably pointing out the obvious here, but when you're doing these sprays, make sure that each previous coat is thoroughly dry to the touch before you go ahead and do that. So put on a nice good couple of coats of clear coat. That protects it, and it also makes a smoother, nice high gloss finish. So I've got a pretty good finish here. I'm not sure how good the camera picks up all the flaws. It's not perfect, but it is very, very good, and it's definitely good enough for me. So, okay, now this part I'm giving a little bit of a disclaimer here. This is probably not the right way to do it, but it does work. So this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to take a little bit of silicone, put a bead on the piece, obviously the side that it fits against the car. And, well, like I said, if there's a better way, then let me know. This might not be the way. Feel free to comment in the comments below, and then let me know if there's a better way. But it works for me, and it works well, so I'm going to use it. Once you got a little bit of silicone on there, fill in the spots and try and get it all over the whole length of it, but it doesn't need to be the whole width of it, just the length of it. Then you come over to the car, and of course you put it in place. Stick the plugs right in the holes that are there. Put it in place. Push it up snug, and any excess silicone that might ooze out, just wipe it off with your finger before it dries, and then it won't be a problem. There it is. It's on the car. That's done. Now it'll just dry and it'll stay in place. Okay, so I'm running out of light here, but I'll show you the end result. It's not perfect, but it is very good, and it looks a lot better. A lot classier than having chips in it, that's for sure. Now remember, it looked like this before it was done. So it's definitely quite a bit of improvement, and well, for me, I'm quite happy with it. So thank you very much for watching, and now you know how to fix the paint chips in the molding of your car. Thanks again for watching.